All right, so we're getting close to 12 o'clock. We've just got a couple more people joining us, so we'll just give them a couple more minutes to log in, and then we'll get moving. Well, Alison, I think it's midday. We said we'd start at midday, so I'm always someone to start on time, so I think we'll get moving.
Okay.
Welcome everyone to our 5th week of our Lunchtime is Money series. Today we've got prospective clients and business contacts of ours joining us today. So welcome to you all. I hope you find today of value. As always with our webinars, please use the Q&A chat box to ask any questions, and we'll try to answer them as we go. We'll also have some time at the end of the presentation for questions as well. It's lovely to be able to connect with everyone over this forum, particularly here in Melbourne when we're all locked away in our homes still, and be really lovely to do this in person one day. So today, I'm Chris Morcom, Director and Private Client Advisor at Hewison Private Wealth, for those who don't know me. And joining me today is Alison Dellow, who's one of our Private Client Advisors. Today, we're going to be talking about philanthropy. So it's a slight change to our previous 4 sessions, and moving away from the investment sphere and into something that's probably a real need at the moment. We've got obviously the pandemic, particularly in Melbourne, has been had a wide effect across many businesses, but the charitable sector particularly has been hit with an inability to raise funds like they normally do throughout since March, really, and so that I suppose is one of the reasons why we wanted to have today. But also we want to present to you today some different options when it comes to philanthropy. So what options do you have in terms of structuring your philanthropy, and also what are some of the things you need to be thinking about around those options? The information we provide today is general advice only, so please, if you want to implement any of the things we're talking about, make sure you get some advice from either Alison or myself or another professional before you step off and go ahead. So perhaps I'll hand over to you, Alison.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. So philanthropy has been an interest of mine and Chris's for quite some time now. We chose to talk about philanthropy today off the back of a recent survey that we conducted across our client base at the start of the year, showed that philanthropy was an area of interest. So in the world that we're living in at the moment, some of us are incredibly fortunate and privileged to be able to continue working from home, but also putting us in a potential position to give back to those people that do need it most. People are still looking to make a difference in this day and age, and even if it's not in the same way that we were being able to help before the pandemic. We really want to stress that there is no right or wrong way in giving back. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. We're just wanting to highlight the advantages of the different ways that you can get involved and the things to also consider with each approach as well.
So really, when we're talking about what is philanthropy, we're not talking about just being active in your local community. We're actually talking here about funding the organisations that do the great work in our communities. So obviously, before you step off and into a program of philanthropy, you want to make sure that your own family's financial future is looked after before you can step off. But so that brings into the question of what resources do you want to put towards it? So money, but also time, because clearly if you're committing a large amount of money, you want to make sure that you've got an appropriate structure in place to help you with your philanthropy. I always encourage people to, when they're talking about philanthropy, particularly considering making a very large contribution to philanthropy, to really understand why they're doing that, and to make sure they communicate that with their families and those that they care about. The structure that you use for your philanthropy will be determined by how much control you want to have over your giving, and how much time that you want to commit to it. You also need to think about whether you're going to be going global or local with your with the projects you're trying to fund, because that will have an impact on the types of structures that you want to use as well. The amount of control you have over the grant making process and the amount of information you get back from the charities to whom you grant money, that obviously that's linked in with how much you're giving, but it's also linked in with the type of structure or the influence of people that you're using to help you with your giving. We actually did a recent survey, just a little tiny microcosm survey, just to get some ideas back for some clients about how they think about philanthropy. And it would come as no surprise that people want to make sure that their family is financially secure before they commit funds to philanthropy, and that's common sense. But what was interesting, that only around half of the respondents to that survey had a structured approach to their giving. The rest of the respondents either had no structure around the way they were giving, or they're just doing it on an ad hoc basis. Which again, that can be fine, but maybe there can be another way to look at your giving to perhaps formalise the way you do it. And pretty much all of the respondents to the survey looked upon their philanthropy as a personal project rather than something they wanted their wider family involved in. And that was probably, for me, the biggest surprise, because I actually had an alternative position on that people would look to include their family. So it was good to get the feedback from our clients that perhaps that's not the way they think about it. There's a number of, we've sort of looked at two different ways that you can, or main ways that you can fund philanthropy. And Alison, perhaps you can take us through a couple of those.
Absolutely. So as Chris mentioned, we've kind of broken down the different ways that you can give back into two broad categories. So passive philanthropy and active philanthropy. So passive philanthropy is all about giving back by way of making a cash or item donation to your chosen charity, but without having any complete control of how that is spent or used. So the two options are donating to charity and leaving assets via your will. So donating to charity, this is where you determine the right charity for you and your family based on the values or a cause that's close to your heart. So by example, it might be the Smith family, you might be giving ad hoc donations every month, RSPCA and things like that. So generally speaking, these donations are tax deductible, but only if the donation is made to a charity that is a deductible gift recipient, otherwise known as DGR, which Chris will touch on in a moment. There's little to no cost to the donor. However, something to keep in mind is looking at what the percentage is going towards admin costs. Now, this can be a negative, but it also can be a positive. A lot of these not-for-profit organisations, they need funding and they're needing to support their staff to do the great work that we're wanting them to do. So one thing that we would probably just highlight is focus on the outcome. You probably wouldn't be too concerned if the admin costs are slightly higher, but you know that that outcome is far greater. The other way to leave assets passively, to gift assets passively, is by way of gifting via your will. Now, this is where you gift part or all of your estate to a chosen charity or a few charities. Traditionally, this is where people have done their charitable giving. This can be by way of bequesting a fraction of your estate or a specific amount, or even the residual of your estate once most of the assets have already been gifted to your beneficiaries. One of the biggest things to consider with this is that you won't be able to actually see the impact that your funds could have. And a few of the lawyers have reported in the past that often bequests haven't actually been communicated to the children or the beneficiaries because they're just not aware of what their loved one's intentions were. And this can cause substantial friction within families and even result in a dispute or lead to a challenge of the will, which is obviously may not be in line with what your wishes are. So we encourage you, if this is something that you would like to do, just be mindful of having open and honest conversations with your families or your beneficiaries about what your intention is of your estate, who you're wanting to support, which charities, and talk about your values as well, and talk about why you're wanting to support those specific charities too. Unlike your personal donations to charities, you or your estate can't actually claim the tax deduction. But like donations to charities, it is also a low cost option that you could consider. Now, Chris is just going to talk us through the the structures within active philanthropy.
Thanks, Alison. Before we move on, Alison, just on that, so would it be your view that if someone's thinking about using their will as a way to bequeath assets, that the most important thing they should be doing is talking to their other beneficiaries about their intentions, and that's sort of one of the major messages you'd like to leave people with today?
Absolutely, because I think when people understand what your intentions are, that they're more than happy to follow through and make sure that your legacy is running on effectively.
That's great. Look, thanks. And so let's move on to active philanthropy. And really what we're talking about here is where you want to have a bigger input into the difference that your donation's making. So that might be through getting better feedback from the charities about how you're granting. Now that generally only can occur if there's processes in place, or if your donations are fairly either very specific or very large. Perhaps you may want to create a legacy that's going to last well beyond your lifetime that is perpetual in nature. And so that's what these types of funds can do. Often it involves larger amounts of money, and it's something where you can contribute, you can gift the income that's being generated from some capital, but leave the capital intact to last forever, effectively. And some of the largest donations that are made to charities today come from foundations that were established decades ago, and the capital has just been accumulating and being used to pay out grants along the way. And you can start small and build these. The first one I want to talk about is a public ancillary fund. Now, it may sound fairly obvious, but a public ancillary fund would be used where you want to raise money from the public, as opposed to it being private in nature. So you can use your own donation, but also ask for donations from the public. It's a funding vehicle, so it's your public ancillary fund is not going to be running projects on the ground. It's simply going to give money to other charities who are running projects. And one of the complexities of a public ancillary fund is that you must have a majority of the trustees being responsible people. Now it's a defined term, but it can mean that if you're the person setting up the charity, you may feel a slight loss of control with that. The alternative view of that, of course, is that you can gather like-minded people together to help you with that philanthropic journey. Deductible gift recipient status is really important for ancillary funds. So deductible gift recipient status means that when you put the money into your ancillary fund, it means that you get a tax deduction for that contribution in. Now, there's 4 types of deductible gift recipients, but 2 main ones, type 1 and type 2. And the easiest way to think about this is type 1 DGRs are the ones that do the charitable work. So they're the Sacred Heart missions, they're they're the organisations doing the work on the ground, saving, whether it's the RSPCA or whether it's the Lost Dog Home. They're actually doing the work on the ground. Type 2 DGR status funding organisations. So they're your ancillary funds. And Type 2 DGRs cannot give money to another Type 2 DGR. It has to go to a Type 1. And because it was just, otherwise you'd end up with just a circular movement of money and no good being done. So the idea, so if you were looking at a charitable purpose that did not have deductible gift recipients Type 1 status, then using an ancillary fund as your vehicle for your philanthropy may not make sense. So you need these. That's where that sort of decision making is really important. There's lots of different types or sort of focuses, I suppose. So you can have very broad, general public ancillary funds that you can really, there's no limit on what you can give money to, or you can have funding organisations that are very focused, for example, on a specific health issue, such as heart disease or something like that, very specific. Community foundations are a type of public ancillary fund, and community foundations are place-based foundations. They generally are very focused on a specific place, whether that's a local area such as the Ballarat Foundation or the Bendigo Foundation. Those place-based foundations are very focused on their local communities. Another version of that is Australian Communities Foundation or the Lord Mayor's Charitable Trust that focus on their particular areas, and then you've got corporate public ancillary funds, and the Hewison Foundation is a really good example of that, where we set that up about just over 5 years ago and we contribute to that each year. Our business does, and we also raise money through some of the things we've done in the past, such as the run around the park or the trivia night, and that is focused. That it's a funding organisation. So we've partnered with Sacred Heart Mission for the last number of years to help alleviate homelessness and the impacts of domestic violence, and that's where we've directed funds our gifts each year from the Hewison Foundation, and so that's a corporate version of it, and of course you have mission specific, where you might develop a funding organisation to fund the curing of a particular kind of cancer, research into a particular kind of cancer, and so you're funding a particular organisation that's focused on that. Rounding out the public ancillary funds, and particularly through the community foundations, is this concept of collective giving, where you are leveraging your donations by, I suppose, joining with other people and together making a larger donation to a particular cause or charitable organisation. And so a version of that, for example, is the Impact 100 process, where you get 100 people together putting $1,000 in, and then through a process deciding on a charity to gift that money. And clearly that's going to make a very large difference to the organisation. But what it does is leverage your gifting. And so an example of that is Australian Communities Foundation, and they help run Impact 100 and collective giving circles, but they also offer many other services. And perhaps, Alison, do you want to perhaps expand on what ACF do and how perhaps people could utilise their services?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. So ACF have been around for over 20 years, and they are a community of giving, connecting those that can give with people and organisations that can actually lead the way. So they're all about driving positive social and environmental change, making it easy and accessible for people from all walks of life to take part in something bigger than themselves. So they provide advice, meaningful support to individuals and families to begin their philanthropic journey. They provide services in compliance, grant making, but also the administration of your actual account as well. They're running various workshops as well for particular causes that you might be interested in. So really being able to connect you with like-minded individuals and allowing you to be motivated by these similar interests or causes. So during the pandemic, they've actually been running all these workshops online, which is fantastic. ACF also can assist with those concerned about their future legacy once they're no longer with us. So ACF do have the capacity to act as independent trustees of your fund to be able to carry through your legacy. There are a few options with ACF. So starting off with the Gumnut account. So this is where it's a very easy way to actually start your journey in giving back. This can start off with a minimum amount of $2,000 plus an annual commitment of $2,000 or every year. So all your donations will be tax deductible. So as that account grows through your annual giving and things like that, if it was to grow more than $20,000, it then automatically converts to a sub-fund or the donor advised sub-fund. So this is where ACF will take care of all the administration and compliance and allowing you to focus solely on the grant making and where your money is actually being granted to and how it's being spent and things like that. ACF also are able to report back to you with how those funds are spent, which is obviously very important to you going forward. As if you choose to continue growing that sub-fund, if you get closer to that $1 million mark, that is where you could then consider a private ancillary fund, which Chris will talk to in a second, a bit more detail. A few of our clients have actually engaged with ACF and have found their services extremely valuable, but also the networks that they've been able to connect with as well, which is fantastic. So if you are interested in ACF, please, I encourage you to look at their website. There's an enormous amount of information online. And if it's something that interests you, please reach out to us and then we'll be more than happy to connect you with someone from ACF itself. So Chris, do you want to just maybe kick off at the private ancillary fund?
Yeah, and I'll just add a comment there that, we've focused in on Australian Communities Foundation because it's an organisation that that we're well aware of, and I've had a lot of done a lot of work with over the years. But it's not to say that other community foundations or other public ancillary funds can't offer the same types of services. And if I would encourage you to look to an organisation, if you don't want to set up your own private ancillary fund, which I'm about to talk about in a moment, look for a foundation that you can partner with that is reflective of your values, because many of these organisations will have a particular flavour to the way in which they approach charity, and I would encourage you to get to understand that and make sure that it reflects your own values and belief systems. And that's why, for example, many people will continue their giving through their local church, because that is their community, and it reflects their value system and belief system. So there's lots of different ways that you can achieve this. It's not just the ones we're presenting today. So private ancillary funds, this is where you're wanting to create that ancillary fund, and you're wanting to perhaps have a perpetual structure in place, but you're not interested in getting money from the public. So this is a private approach, and often families will utilise these types. Individuals and families will use these to have a structure around their own philanthropy and giving. And sometimes you can use your private ancillary fund in conjunction with the services of public ancillary funds as well. Again, you have to give the money to type 1 DGRs, so that it's still an ancillary fund, so it's still a funding mechanism. But in terms of running your private ancillary fund, you only need one responsible person. So that means that the founder founders who are setting up their private ancillary fund effectively regain a lot more control over the processes. it certainly some families use private ancillary funds as a way to bring the family together and really solidify the family's value set. And that can be a really attractive for some families, particularly families who have built significant wealth and want to make sure that the generations that are coming along behind them understand the values and belief systems of the family, and that the money that is being passed down, whilst good to have, also comes with it a responsibility and a sense of custodianship. Some families also use it as an opportunity to teach the younger members of their family about investment management and corporate governance by inviting them into the running of the private ancillary fund before they are opened up to the wider family finances and perhaps business opportunities. So it's an opportunity to help educate the younger members of a family around those really critical aspects of cash flow and corporate governance and the impacts of compound earnings. I would say that with if you're going to set up a private ancillary fund, you would want to have a fairly firm idea around the way in which you want to approach your philanthropy. And because generally you would not set one up unless you're going to be putting a significant amount of money into it. There are services available to assist you to establish and run a private ancillary fund, and certainly the people like Australian Philanthropic Services are a really good place to visit and talk to about the establishment process, but also the annual administration processes as well. You've got to have an annual set of accounts prepared. Those accounts have to be audited, and you have to do annual lodgements with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. Also, your accountant may also have experience in that area as well, and can offer those types of services. For those who are running private ancillary funds, often it's useful to reach out to people like ACF or even Australian Philanthropic Services to get access to their grant-making services, and you have to pay a fee, but it gives you access to their intellectual property around what charities are doing, what needs they have, and perhaps projects that are particularly in line with your value set and belief systems. In terms of strategies around why would you set one up, there's a couple that come to mind. If you're someone who's already giving a substantial amount every year out of your cash flow, and you know that you have a significant tax event coming up, it might be the sale of a business, it may be the sale of a very valuable asset, which is going to give rise to a very large capital gain. It may be appropriate for you to look at, instead of continuing to gift out of your normal cash flow, to shift some of the proceeds of the sale of that asset into a private ancillary fund, getting a tax deduction in the process to offset the capital gains tax that would be payable on that asset sale or business sale. And then instead of contributing out of your normal cash flow to your charities, have those contributions go to those charities from your private ancillary fund. So from a funding mechanism, you're just shifting, you're using the tax deduction to help reduce obviously your tax liability, but you're also continuing or enhancing your philanthropy along the way. Of course, we don't do philanthropy for a tax deduction, but where you can get a tax deduction to reduce the cost, it certainly helps. I'd also encourage you, if you are really serious about your philanthropy and want to learn a lot more, Philanthropy Australia is the peak body for philanthropy and not-for-profit organisations in Australia, and they also have a lot of services available for individuals and families to learn more. You can become a member of Philanthropy Australia and get access to a lot of resources. There's incredible things that they can provide, including interactive maps of who's giving to what organisations. It's fascinating. But if all of that doesn't quite float it for you, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I actually want to be more I want to be more involved. I actually want to be making the difference myself. Then probably what you're talking about is setting up your own charity, which is outside of the scope of today. But I would flag it with you is that that obviously involves a lot of work. There are slightly higher setup costs to do that versus an ancillary fund, but it can also mean that you gain DGR Type 1 status, which means that then you can start being someone who is looking to these ancillary funds for donations to further what you do. So it depends on what your focus is, and it does depend on how you want to go about it. But the private ancillary funds, from my way of thinking, can really provide a great way to structure your giving in a very tax effective way to accumulate a significant amount of capital that can provide a legacy for the longer term. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that, Alison?
No.
So that sort of brings to a close, or the sort of, I suppose, the information part of what we wanted to provide today. We'd be delighted to answer questions if you've got any. So please, if you've got questions, type them into the Q&A box there on your chat screen, and we'd happily respond to them. And otherwise, Alison and I can just keep talking, which is not good for anyone.
While we wait for any questions that come through, thanks again for everyone for actually joining today in our session. So this session will be recorded like all of our other previous sessions, and will be accessible online. Next week, our MD, Andrew Hewison, will be back with an interview with Mark Freeman and Jeff Driver from Australian Foundation Investment Company, otherwise known as AFI. Many of our clients would have heard of AFI as they have shares in with this listed investment company. So we encourage you to come along next week and join us there. And if you are one of our clients, hopefully we'll be seeing you in the office soon, fingers crossed. But other than that, I don't think any questions have come through. But thank you again for your interest today, and take care.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you joining us today. I hope you gained some information that was of use to you, and please feel free to reach out to us if you prefer not to have a question in this forum. But Alice and I would be very happy to answer any queries you've got.
Absolutely.
With that, we'll say goodbye and have a good afternoon, everyone.